and we're going to be continuing on in the Mark of the Beast, Volume 2. And we left off, I think it was around page 155, where it's starting about the second death. And if you remember what we were covering this last, last class, we're in the chapter 12. And we're actually going to finish up chapter 12 and get into chapter 13 this evening. But chapter 12 is dealing with the resurrection of the dead and Messiah. And one of the last things that we covered last week, had to do with the calling. Nobody can come to Yahweh's house. Nobody is here on their own. We have to remember that. It's not any different than trying to go to a function at the White House. You're not going to invite yourself to a function at the White House. If you show up on the door of the White House, say, I want to attend the state dinner, you're going to have some people that are probably going to politely, or maybe not so politely escort you off the grounds. Well, and it's the same way in Yahweh's house. Nobody can come unless Yahweh draws that person. Yahweh is inviting those to qualify, to be whom he wants to be a part of his ruling government. And men, that's why we're here. We're here to learn how to be a part of this ruling government. That's our whole purpose for being here. To learn how to apply these laws, statutes, commandments, and judgments, because it's the following and the complete submission to these things that's going to straighten out the world. And we can't be a part of that government if we don't learn the laws of that government and learn how to apply and to teach those laws. So every person, every person that is here we've been called, and we're brought here to Yahweh's house, where we are taught how to keep Yahweh's law. We were never taught to keep Yahweh's law out in the world. The concept of the world, if you think about the concept of the worldly churches, they are come as you are. You don't have to change a thing. Just come on in and completely be yourself. You don't have to do any effort, no effort on your part, nothing to change. Well, if you remember when we were studying, did Yahshua Messiah pre-exist and devil worship the shocking facts? That was a hallmark. That was a characteristic of the ancient pagan religions, the Babylonish religions, all of those ancient religions. That was something that they did. These ancient religions would always change to meet the needs of the people. Yahweh doesn't change to meet our needs. He calls us to his house, and he tells us, now, if you want to be a part of this kingdom, you need to learn these laws. You need to change from your corrupt, evil character into my perfect, righteous character. And I'm going to show you how to do it, he says. He says, I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm going to set examples before you on how to do it. And we have that. We have that through through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, through Yahshua. We have a living example today of that with our pastor and overseer, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins. He shows us. He is showing us how to walk in the way of Yahweh and what our attitude should be and what our character should be. And mankind hopes that the conditions will change without expecting change within himself. And that's mankind's hope. That they don't have to put forth any effort, but things are going to get better. We have to put forth the effort. We have to make a change within ourselves in order to make a change in the world. We're going to have to make a change within ourselves. We're going to have to overcome this carnal mind, this carnal nature, this worldly nature that each and every one of us was created with. And we were created that way purposefully so that we could be tested and prove to Yahweh truly which way that we want to go. If there's no challenges in our lives, if we don't have little tests, if we don't have challenges that come up from time to time, there's not much, there wouldn't be much of an effort. It wouldn't be difficult to remain if we weren't tested from time to time. If everything was, as the world would say, a bed of roses. Well, you got this beautiful flower on top of this stem, this beautiful rose, but on that, all along that stem, what do you have? You've got thorns. Okay? And this is, the prize that we have, the kingdom of Yahweh, is like that rose. But in order to get to that rose, we have to overcome the obstacles of the carnal mind. We have to overcome the obstacles that the gods and Satan want us to become, that unrighteous character. So, we have that calling, and then we talked a little bit about the first resurrection last week, and it shows that those of the house of Yahweh designated to be the ones called Philadelphia, they do live by the every word that proceeds out of Yahweh's mouth, and there are going to be part of this first resurrection. All of those who were ever called throughout the 6,000-year, a little over 6,000-year history of mankind, all of those who were called and had their minds open to the knowledge of Yahweh and were given the opportunity to overcome, they are going to have, they are going to be resurrected. Yeah, and they're going to be rewarded, as the scriptures show, as according as their works will be. And then we're starting off here on page 155 here, where it talks about the second death. Yahweh is drawing the ones who are called out at this very time. Yahweh is giving the called out ones the opportunity to either be called into the marriage supper of the Lamb, to take advantage of that invitation, that everybody here has that invitation, to take advantage of it, and to put it to proper use, or to be cast into the fire that is prepared for Satan and her angels. Those found unrighteous in the first resurrection are cast into the lake of fire prepared for Satan and her angels, but they will be cast into the fire before the 1,000-year reign, after which Satan is loosed. And the scripture speaks about the first resurrection and then the second resurrection. Christianity doesn't seem to realize that there's two resurrections there. But there is, and we know what the purpose of that is. And this is what we're actually covering here now. So we see in Revelation 20:6-8, it says, "Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power, but they will priests of Yahweh and of the Messiah, and will reign with him 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years has expired, Satan will be loosed out of her prison, and will go out to deceive, that is, to seduce and lead astray the nations, which are in the four quarters of the earth. And it says, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sands of the sea." So Satan after this millennial reign takes place, Satan will be loosed to try to deceive the nations once again. The difference between this first resurrection and the second resurrection, people have thought that the people with the involved in the second resurrection are going to have an easier time. They're not going to have as much to deal with or to overcome. They're going to have the same tests. They're going to have the same pulls. They're going to have the same things to overcome. They're going to be tested just as we are, as we are today. The difference is, and Pastor has brought this out many times, is that they're going to have, mankind during the second resurrection is going to have 1,000 years of history to show what the simple obedience to the laws of Yahweh will bring. How it can take something that, where mankind ruined the earth and the heavens and everything that is in it, to the point where everything was going to be totally wiped out if Yahweh didn't step in. Okay? To bring it back from that point, 1,000 years to bring it back to perfection. And this is what those involved in the second resurrection are going to have. They're going to have that history that they're going to be able to see. But Satan is still going to be loosed, and it actually shows that Satan is still going to be able to pull some people out. But that's the difference. We're believing these things without seeing them. Those involved in the second resurrection are going to have the proof, that which they see. Now they can compare, okay, this is the way it was, this is how it is now, which way do I want to go, what do I want to be a part of? Okay? What we're doing now is we're putting our faith and our trust completely 100% in the laws and the prophecies of Yahweh. But when Satan is loosed and will try to deceive all the remaining ones who have not been drawn out by Yahweh during this day and time, Thus, those remaining will have to overcome Satan then, just as we do who are called out today have to overcome Satan today. They still have to prove that they're not going to be a part of practicing iniquity, practicing sin any longer. They're going to have to prove themselves that they're not going to be a part of that they are not going to bring destruction once they're allowed everlasting life. In Revelation 20:10 it says, "And the devil who deceived them, seduced and led them astray, was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet had been cast," and it says, "will be tormented a day and a night because of the ages." If you're cast into the lake of fire, you'll be among the very first ones to be burned up, Pastor shows here. He says the fire will also be the means of your second death. And then Revelation 20 verse 6 says, "Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power." And he clarifies some things here for us, and he shows that the word translated part in Revelation 20 verse 6 is word number 3313 in Strong's Greek Dictionary, meros, and, meromoi. Okay, and the meaning of these words is to get as a selection or allotment, a division or share. Revelation 20 verse 6 says that those who are blessed and holy to receive part of this righteousness granted to them at the throne of decision. And remember, we are being tried and tested now. Our tests and our trials are taking place now. We have to remember what the apostles and the prophets show, that judgment begins at the house of Yahweh. Judgment begins with our every thought, our action, our words, what's going through our mind. How do we deal with certain situations when situations come up? How do we conduct ourselves in private behind locked doors when we think nobody's looking? Remember, these things, there's nothing hidden from Yahweh. Everything's going to be brought to light. So our tests and trials are now. When we are called up into the clouds to go before the throne of Yahweh, we are actually being called up at that point for our sentencing. There's not going to be, there's not going to be a presentation of evidence at that point. There's not going to be any arguments back and forth. It's simply going to be, well done, my faithful servant, enter into the joy of your rule. Or get away from me, you who work iniquity. I don't know which house you're from. That is going to be the sentencing. That is what is awaiting us, is that sentencing before that office, as we're going to see here in this next chapter. But it's that throne, as part of that throne of decision. Revelation 21 verse 8 speaks about the part of those who are not fit for the kingdom of Yahweh. In Revelation 21 verse 8 it says, "But the fearful and the unbelieving and the abominable and the murderers and the whoremongers and the sorcerers and the worshippers of gods and all liars." You remember what the definition of a liar is. He who says, "I know him," but does not keep his law is a what? As a liar. And what is not in him? And the truth, and praise Yahweh, and the truth is not in him. And you got to go back to Psalm 119, 142, and 151. Yeah, I think that's it. Psalm 119, 142, 151. That talks about the laws of Yahweh are the truth. But it says, but it shows here. It says, "And all liars will have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." Because at that time, by the time that decision rolls around, we will have already proven which way we're going to go. Okay, and this is what we are doing now. We're proving to Yahweh whether we want His way or not. When the seventh trump of Revelation of the seventh seal sounds, the dead in Messiah are going to be resurrected first. And the called out ones who are still alive will then be changed and also rise to meet Yeshua in the clouds. Shaul also tells us that there will be those who love the appearing of Yeshua when he comes. In 2 Timothy 4:8, "From here on there is stored up for me a crown of righteousness with which Yeshua, the righteous judge, will give me at that day, and not me only, but all of those who love his appearing." You think about that when you see the judge appearing. When you see the judge appearing, where do we stand now? Are we going to be joyful when we see him because we know our reward is waiting? Or are we going to say, oh man, I didn't do it. I should have done this. I knew I should have done this. Where are we going to be? Think about this feast that's coming up, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Remember what that feast represents. It represents, living a life without sin, because leavening represents sin, right? So the reason we don't partake in leaven during that time, it's a reminder to put that sin, to get that out of our lives. And the time, the evening before that Yeshua's memorial, we should be really examining ourselves. We should actually be examining ourselves every day. We should be examining ourselves every day, and then taking full advantage of confession on early Sabbath night. After law class, we should really be taking advantage of that, because how many people in the world have the opportunity to actually go to the priest, to actually go and ask Father Yahweh to forgive their sins? It's this group right here. There is nobody else. Nowhere else has this opportunity to be able to do this. And that's something we really have to stop and consider where we are. We are a special treasure to Yahweh. We are a very special treasure to Yahweh. And He sees something in each and every one of us and has brought us to His house because He wants us here. If He didn't want us here, we wouldn't be here. So there's something within our character that He wants to be a part of His kingdom, that He wants to be a part of His family. And all we have to do is He brings us here, and what do we need to do? We need to develop it. And He helps us. He gives us the way to develop that through the laws, through the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. Not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of, it's just not the benefit of all mankind, but it's the benefit of the entire universe, of all, of everything that Yahweh has created. You think about that. You think about the job that is waiting for us. It can be a little overwhelming, but it is there, and it's being offered to each and every one here. So those who do every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh will love Yeshua's appearing. Those who have only heard Yahweh's every word, but thought about keeping the 10 Commandments was enough, will be very assuredly dread this day. If we're hanging on to anything, if there's anything that we're hanging on to, we need to get rid of it. We need to confess it. We need to repent. We need to confess it. We need to start working on it. Get with your counselors if there's something, if there's something there. There's absolutely nothing that you can tell your counselors, that they can't help you with. That's why we're here. That's why our counselors are here, is to help us, each and every one of us. But chapter 13, the rewards of the righteous. In Revelation 11, 18 through 19, it says, and the nations were angry. And it says here, your wrath has come. It's not the wrath. And as we get into some of this stuff here in the Encyclopedia Judaica, here in a few pages, you're going to see how that thought and that pervasive idea that they try to put forth, that Yahweh is a mean old God of the Old Testament. You're going to see that because it'll say vengeance, it says wrath, it says anger, it says all of these things. And we've been taught and shown that that's not true. But the nations were angry, and your judgment has come, and the time of the dead, that they should be sentenced, and that you should give reward to your servants the prophets, and to all the saints who reverence your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Now you think about how people can destroy the earth. It's simply partaking in sin. Because it's partaking in sin that corrupts the microorganisms. The microorganisms in turn can't do their job. So they can't cleanse the earth. They can't function properly. They can't do the things that they need to do. Then the house of Yahweh was made open for all to see in heaven. And Pastor shows here, he says, in chapter 11 we discussed the time of the dead, that they should be judged. At the sound of the last trump, after the great tribulation and before the 1,000-year reign of Yahshua, we found that all of Yahweh's called out ones will be resurrected to meet Yahshua in the clouds. We will then be taken for sentencing at Yahshua's throne. It is at this throne that Yahshua will separate the righteous called out ones from the evil called out ones. There's going to be those who are going to be, it's from Yahshua's sentencing that each called out one who is in the first resurrection will receive a reward of one kind or another. They're either rewards or consequences, just like the peaceful solution teaches us. Our thoughts, our thoughts and desires lead to feelings, and those feelings are going to lead to action. Those actions lead to either rewards or consequences. The actions are going to lead somewhere, one or the other. And this is what is, and this is what Pastor said all the way back in the late 70s, early 80s. He was teaching the same thing. In Daniel 12, 2-3, it says, "And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise will shine as the brightness of the heavens, and those who turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever." Now, remember, Pastor showed us, and he's been showing us here over the past few weeks, that those who are wise, think about the wisdom, the reverence of Yahweh, like Proverbs shows. The reverence of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. And those who are wise will shine as the brightness of heavens. And it's talking about teachers. He brought that out here just this last week. How those who are wise will shine as the brightness of heavens, talking about teachers, and those who turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. How can they turn? How can we turn? How can people be turned? And those who turn many to righteousness. How can that be done unless they've been taught? They have to be taught righteousness. They have to be taught what to teach, right? They have to be taught what to teach. They have to be taught themselves what righteousness is so they can practice it. And then so they can go forth and not just benefit from it from themselves, but go forth and teach others. This true scripture of Yahweh shows in this first resurrection will be those who will not be given the gift of eternal life. So it's not just those who will receive that gift, but it also shows what will befall those who are not given this gift of eternal life. Our Savior plainly shows us why many will awake to shame. In Matthew 7:21-23, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Teacher, teacher,' will enter into the kingdom of Yahweh, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, 'Teacher, teacher, have we not prophesied in your name? Have we not cast out demons in your name, and in your name performed many wonderful works?' But in that day I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Get away from me, you who practice iniquity,' or you who break the law of Yahweh." And remember that word iniquity, as we're going to see here, is a violation of the law. It means not subject to the Jewish law, lawless, transgressor, unlawful, wicked. It means pushing aside that law. It's not that important. I can go ahead and get away with that one. I can keep 612, but this one over here, we'll go ahead and we'll bypass that one. Not going to take place. But in the first resurrection will be those who know and practice using the names of Yahshua and Yahweh and his son Yahshua Messiah. Okay? They'll know the names. They'll know the name Yahweh. They'll know the name Yahshua. They will have eaten and drunk in Yahweh's name at Yahweh's feast. They may have cast out demons in Yahshua's name. They may still have been doing wonderful works up until the very minute that they were called up to the sea of glass here, but it shows here that up until the very minute that they were called to that judgment throne. But at the judgment throne, Yahshua will say, "I never knew you. Get away from me, you who depart. You get away from me. Depart from me, you who work iniquity. I never knew you. I don't know which house you're from." Remember the parable of the wheat and the tares. The tares are going to grow with the wheat. But in the end, they're going to be separated out. And Pastor, again, he shows here, he says, "Please study the meanings of the word iniquity for yourself." Your eternal life is at stake. The meaning of the word iniquity is not subject to the Jewish law. The law of Yahweh is referred to as the Jewish law, for Yahweh's laws were first given to the Jews. Iniquity also means transgressor and lawless. 1 Yachanan 3:4 shows us that sin is the transgression of Yahweh's law. Jacob 2:10 through 12 shows that breaking any part of the law means you are breaking all of Yahweh's law. The law has 613 perfect points to it. Just like a circle. A circle has 360 degrees to it, right? Okay. So, if at any point along that circle there's a chunk that's taken out, that circle is no longer perfect, right? Well, praise Yahweh. It's the same way with the law of Yahweh. The law of Yahweh has 613 points. Okay? And those points work together to form that perfect body, that perfect law that will govern perfectly that perfect government that Yahweh has established. If any one of those is set aside, if any one of those is forgotten, if any one of those is pushed away or changed in any way, then the law is no longer perfect. It can no longer do what Yahweh has set out for it to do. So this is why Jacob was, that's why he said that if you break a law in any point, then the entire body of law, the entire law itself is broken. And it shows here, he says, how can anyone become a transgressor of the law? By not living by every word that comes from Yahweh's mouth, as Yeshua shows in Matthew 4:4. But he said and answered them, and he said, as is written, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. And you notice there the pastor has bolded, made capitalized and underlined, by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. Okay? Each and every one who has ever been called out by Yahweh will be given the opportunity to live by his every word. And they're going to be resurrected, and they're going to be brought to this judgment throne that's going to be situated. And then those who do not take advantage here, look at the warning here pastor gives here. He says, those who do not take advantage of this living opportunity, will be separated from those who did take advantage of this time. So there's going to be a separation that's going to take place. But those who did overcome and did obey every word that proceeded from the mouth of Yahweh will enter into the marriage supper of the Lamb. And those who have not repented of breaking the laws of Yahweh will be cast into the lake of fire to be burned up and gotten out of the way. And remember, pastor shows, people's, Christianity, kind of looks at it and says, well, just how evil is that? Look how bad that is. But pastor has shown it's actually an act of mercy and an act of kindness, because continuing to live without the laws of Yahweh, continuing to practice sin, is only going to bring death, misery, and destruction. 6,000 years of mankind's history has proven that point. You look at the birth defects, you look at the diseases that are out there from the breaking of the laws of purity, from breaking the laws concerning the eating of the clean and the unclean food laws. You see the result from hiding Yahweh's name and preventing people from actually coming to Yahweh's house. When they took away the name of Yahweh, when Satan inspired mankind to actually take away and hide the name of Yahweh, then mankind was no longer looking for the house of Yahweh. They were looking for the house of the Lord. They were looking for the house of God. They were not looking for the house of Yahweh. They could not fulfill the law that says, come, let us go up to the house of Yahweh. They were looking, oh, this is the house of God. This is the house of the Lord over here. They couldn't keep that law. That was an effort to prevent people from coming to Yahweh's house and learning of Yahweh's way, from learning the laws of Yahweh. So you can see just how something just as simple as, well, it really doesn't matter what you call the Creator. It absolutely does. And you can see how that one point or that one law would actually snowball into contributing to and creating this mess that we have out here in the world today. Okay, but those who have not repented of breaking the law will be cast in the lake of fire. Then Matthew 25, 31 to 34 and 41, it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and with all the holy Malachim with him, then he will sit upon his throne in his glory. And remember, Pastor said, no, we've not sitting in a chair. I think there's going to be a big old chair, and he said, I'm here, I made it. It's an office. It's an office. That's the office of high priest, that he will, he's going to be crowned King of kings and ruler of rulers. And those involved in the marriage supper, those who attend this marriage supper are going to see that take place, and they're going to see that office given. Pastor has pointed that out to us. There's eye has not seen nor ear heard the things that await for us. We have to kind of keep these things in mind, and in the light of in the light of that, if we can get our mind off the carnal mind, off the carnal things of this world, the things that we have, that seem to just kind of throw us off from day to day. If we can do like the apostles did, do like the prophets did, and look for the things that are coming, it's going to make these trials and things that we have to go through just a little bit easier. Because as Pastor has said, when people see, flames licking them in the face, they see that lake of fire there and they know they're headed toward it, all of a sudden those little tests and trials, that seem so big and seem so insurmountable at the time, aren't going to seem so insurmountable. And at the same time, anything that we have to go through today in order to qualify for the kingdom of Yahweh, it's going to seem insignificant when that reward is given. So I mean, and I know that can be kind of, it can be kind of a hard thing to focus on and to and to get our mind wrapped around, but we really need to work on that. We really need to focus that and believe and trust in these things, because Father Yahweh fulfills his promises. He keeps his laws. He keeps his promises, and not one of these promises will fail. Not one of the prophecies to date has failed, has it? Everything that has been prophesied to come to pass up until this point has come to pass in detail, right? So what's going to keep the rest of them? What's going to keep the rest of them from coming to pass? Nothing. They will. The promises, the prophecies, and the rewards, they will be there. All we have to do is endure until the end, which isn't that far off. But continuing on here, it shows here, it says, and before him will be gathered all peoples, and he will separate them one from another, just as a shepherd separates his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep, the righteous, on his right hand, but the goats of the wicked on the left. And the king will say to those on his right hand, come, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. In verse 41, he will then say to those on his left hand, go away from me, you accursed ones, into the lake into the fire of the end of the age, prepared for the devil and her angels. So those who have refused to repent of breaking the laws of Yahweh will suffer the second death at the time of the first resurrection. Those who enter into the marriage supper of the Lamb will be given their rewards. So the rewards are going to be given again, men, either way. It's just what reward awaits us as individuals. Okay? And that's up to us, right? One thing I forgot to mention, and I was going to mention that here, and it was back over on page 158. Remember where it says that you will have that many people who are involved in this first resurrection will have eaten and drunk in Yeshua's name and Yahweh's name at Yahweh's feasts, and they may have cast out demons. They may still be doing wonderful works up until the very minute they were called up to the sea of glass. But at the throne of judgment, Yeshua will say, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who work iniquity. Just because we're physically here in the house of Yahweh doesn't mean that we've got it made. We don't. It's not a guaranteed thing just because we're physically here. And that's something we have to think about as well. The churches will make you think that. They think, well, you come in here and you're saved. If you remember the Tower of Babel, that's what the Tower of Babel was. That's what that pinnacle represented, remember? It represented the diversion. That pinnacle represented the diversion of the judgment that would come from Yahweh, or that punishment, the judgment, the consequences from the breaking of sin. Hurry, get up underneath here, get up underneath the pinnacle, and all of this judgment, all of these bad things are just going to go right away from you, and you're going to be saved. Okay? That's what that pinnacle represents. Okay? But just because, just because that we're in the house of Yahweh, just because we're in the place of safety, we still have to be providing the effort. We still have to be putting forth the effort to overcome. And we just have to keep at it day after day, little bit by little bit. Keep chipping at that mountain, keep chipping at that rock, whatever it is. We have to be persistent and not give up. A just man will fall 7 times and get up and keep moving. We have to. We can't stop. If we stop, we're done. If we stop and we just give up, then Satan has won, and then our judgment is pretty well set. But we have to keep moving forward. We have to push on for that. We have to keep on pushing toward that promise, toward that end result. Now, the promise to the patriarchs on page 160. In Genesis 17:7, Yahweh gave a provision of his covenant, his promise to Abraham. In this particular provision, Yahweh provides that he will be a father to Abraham and to Abraham's children after him. Now, a provision, let me see here if I can, let me see if this is going to cooperate here. Oh, yeah. It's slow, but it's getting there. Okay. That ought to be just fine right there. If not, I'll just make it a little bigger. All right. So the legal definition, and I looked that up actually in a legal dictionary. It's actually through Merriam-Webster.com, and it's under the word provision. A provision is a stipulation as a clause in a statute or contract made beforehand. And then you can see here the covenant. A covenant is actually it's a formal, solemn, and binding agreement. And this is what was made. This covenant was made between Yahweh and Abraham. This covenant was made. It was a solemn, formal, and binding agreement. It's a written agreement or promise, usually under a seal, by 2 or more parties, especially for the performance of some action. For the performance of some action, what action are we? Are we as part of this covenant? If you will do what? Diligently obey my voice. Yahweh says, I will be who? I will be your father, and you will be what? My children. Absolutely correct. So that kind of in a nutshell is the covenant. And it's if we diligently obey the voice of Yahweh, if we diligently obey Yahweh's laws, statutes, commandments, and judgments, which are taught by the voice of Yahweh in these last days, then Yahweh promises us, I will be your father, and you will be my children. So there's 2 parts to this agreement, and it is a legal binding agreement. It's a legal contract. That if we diligently obey Yahweh's voice, if we keep these laws, statutes, commandments, and judgments, then Yahweh promises us, I will be your father, and you will be my children. So you can see both sides there, and there are provisions to this covenant. In Genesis 17:7, it says, I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for all generations to come, to be your father and the father of your descendants after you. Now Yahweh gives another provision of this promise in Genesis 17:8. I will also give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger. The land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession. These provisions of the covenant between Abraham and Yahweh only stated Yahweh's part of the promise. The covenant itself is not mentioned. Yahweh reiterated his covenant, his promise to Isaac, Abraham's son. At this time, Abraham's provision of the covenant is stated. In Genesis 26:2-5, and Yahweh appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Stay in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For you and your seed I give all these lands, and I will confirm the oath which I vowed to Abraham your father. And I will make your seed multiply as the stars of heaven, and I will give to you your seed all of these lands, and in your seed all of the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So we see here in Genesis 26:6 that Isaac obeyed Yahweh's words, and Isaac dwelt in Gerar. In Genesis, Jacob, Abraham's grandson, also accepted Yahweh's covenant to obey every word that proceeded from Yahweh's mouth. In Genesis 28:20 through 22, then Jacob made a vow, saying, if Yahweh will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I can come back to my father's house in peace, then Yahweh shall be my heavenly Father. And this stone I have set a pillar shall be Yahweh's house, and of all things that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. Yahweh made the promise that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would inherit the land they journeyed on in Canaan. They had faith in Yahweh's promise, but they had not yet received this reward. So, if you remember in Hebrews chapter 11, all of those who have gone before us, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the prophets, all the apostles, everyone who was called, everyone who qualified for a position in this kingdom and has gone to sleep, all of these died. In Hebrews 11, it shows here, all of these died in the faith, but not having received the promises. And then verse 13 there, chapter 11, verse 13, it says, all these died in the faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and they were convinced of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. You think about what we were talking about earlier. This is what they did. They saw these promises, they saw them afar off, and they were convinced, and they embraced them. This was where they set their sights. Not of the things of this earth, because they realized that everything on this earth is fleeting. Just like it says in I think it's 1 Yochanan chapter 2. It says all the things that are in the earth, all of the things that are in the world, the pride of life, and all of the things that the material things, are perishing, and they're going to go away. But he who does the will of Yahweh will abide forever. So, and you can see here in verse 13 there, that's what they did. And they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, had they been thinking of the country which they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they long for a better kingdom, that is a heavenly, and therefore Yahweh is not ashamed to be called their Father, for he has prepared a city for them. And then verse 39, and it shows here, it says, all of these, having obtained a righteous report through the faith, and you can take a look at what the apostles went through, the prophets went through, the patriarchs. You can see all of the things that they went through, and the tests and the trials that they went through, but yet they had their minds and they had their sights set on this kingdom. And it said, and all of these, having obtained a righteous report through the faith, have not received the promise. Yahweh having provided some better thing for us, that they without us will not be made perfect. We've got to remember the plan of Yahweh. The plan of Yahweh is to create mankind in his image and in his likeness. Okay? And in order to do that, mankind has to be tested. And pastors brought this out, and he brought it out years ago. He's probably brought it out, and I'm sure he's brought it out in books. I know it's in the book of Yisrayl somewhere. And it's probably in the Reverence of Yahweh series or Going On to Perfection. It's probably in that series there. But he showed that, us in this time period, have so much more to overcome than those in the previous time periods. Because of the technology, because of technological advances that are here, and we have to go through and we have to prove that we can overcome these temptations, because Yahweh would know if there was nobody in this time period at all that was able to come through this, then Yahweh would know that any generation before, if they were placed under these same tests, these same trials, that they wouldn't be able to make it either. So we have to be able to make it through this time period, through these times of severe testing. And Yahweh shows that we will. Yahweh shows that this work is not going to be put into the grave, as the previous works were, that this last era of the house of Yahweh is going to usher in the kingdom of Yahweh. It will do that. And we have the opportunity, praise Yahweh, and we have the opportunity to be a part of that. And we are a part of that at this time. But they, having provided some better thing for us, that they without us would not be made perfect. So, and this is again that we see back in the resurrection, back in the first resurrection, all of those who died in Messiah, those are going to be resurrected first, and then those who are alive and remain are going to be changed, and we're all going to be gathered together and taken to that sentencing throne. But the promise to the prophets here, we're going to see the promise to the prophets. The Holy Bible is a book whose contents are about 75% prophecy, and about 75% of these prophecies have already been fulfilled. The fact then remains that 25% of the prophecy has yet to be fulfilled. Okay, so there are still many prophecies that are yet to be fulfilled and that are being fulfilled, and I think we're going to start seeing more and more of these things fulfilled more rapidly. But these prophecies are promises Yahweh made through the prophets. The Encyclopedia Judaica, Volume 6, pages 860 to 872 show us very clearly the promises Yahweh has made through the prophets. Okay. Through the prophets. So the prophet's reward, now notice this here. Notice what Pastor tells us here. He says the prophet's reward will be to see these promises come to pass. You know, you think about the reward that we have for keeping Yahweh's law. You know, and for believing in these things, to see these promises come to pass. You know, we saw the promises of the protection of Pastor. We've seen that come to pass. We've seen him taken to jail. He told us he was going to be arrested. Years and years and years before it took place, he said, "What are you going to do, brethren? What are you going to do when they come and arrest me? What are you going to do? Are you going to stand strong or are you going to run?" He knew years that was going to take place, for years before it actually did. And he was preparing us. What are you going to do? Are you going to stand strong or are you going to tuck tail and run? Well, that promise came to pass. That prophecy came to pass, and we saw it. We were witness to that. That he was arrested and he was in custody. If I remember right, wasn't it about 10 days? He was in custody about that. And then he was released, and lo and behold, all the charges were dropped. Not a one of them stood. So, you know, that promise, we saw that come to pass. That was a promise. That was a promise of protection to see that this work would continue. That was an effort by Satan the adversary to put an end to this work. Do you realize that? That arrest was an attempt to smite the shepherd so the sheep would scatter. That's what that was. But it didn't work. Because the righteous stood fast, they held fast, they stood in their place, and Pastor was released. All the charges, all those false accusations that were made were dropped, they were dismissed, just like they never existed. And this house is still standing and still plugging away. And it's going to continue to do so. Now, at that time, when that was going, how many people were here when that took place? There were a lot of, praise Yahweh. Okay, my question is, did that seem pretty severe at that time? It seemed pretty bad at that time, didn't it? It seemed pretty severe, but you know what? We got through it. Yahweh brought us through. We trusted in Yahweh, we trusted in his protection, and you know what? We saw that reward come to pass, that this work would not be put in the grave. That was one attempt. There's going to be other attempts that are going to be made, and they're going to be more severe. And men, we have to have in our minds that these things, that we have to have in our minds to stand strong and to remain firm, and to not let these things shake us. Pastor's telling us, he's telling us worse things are coming. But what do we have to fear? Yahweh's with us. Yahweh's with his house. Yahweh's with his witness. Yahweh is going to see that his house is protected. All we have to do is stand in our place and do what we need to do and do as we're instructed to do. And then we abide under the shadow of that protection of the Almighty, just like Psalm 91 tells us. We've got nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear. But we see here the prophet's reward will be to see these promises come to pass. So, and that's just just one instance. There's many others. I'm sure there's many others, but that's just one that kind of comes to mind. Now, this next one here, I gotta look at this word for a second. Eschatology. Okay, eschatology. This is actually out of the Encyclopedia Judaica about eschatology, and it's a big old long word. And what this shows here, it says the general term eschatology designates the doctrine concerning the last things. And the word last can be understood either absolutely as referring to the ultimate destiny of mankind in general or of each individual man, or relatively as referring to the end of a certain period in the history of mankind or of a nation that is followed by another entirely different historical period. So it can either mean, the ultimate result of what takes place, or it can be like a transition, the end of one era and the beginning of another. Now, the best way that I can think of looking at that, if you remember in Daniel chapter 2, remember in the vision that Daniel told the king, was the vision of the statue had the golden head, and then the bronze, and then the iron mixed with clay. I mean, you remember? And what was that? What did that represent? Anybody remember what that represented? All right, the last 4 world ruling kingdoms, because they were in the kingdom of Babylon, and that there were going to be 4 world ruling kingdoms, and that was Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Okay, and the one actually you had that one period of history of the Babylonian Empire, and then it kind of that era kind of ended. And then it went into the Medo-Persian, and then that one kind of went to an end, and then it went to the Greek, and then that one kind of ended. Well, they kind of transitioned, from these historical time periods, and that's about the only way that I can really think of this, of how this word eschatology, and when it shows that a certain period in history of mankind, or that of a nation that is followed by another entirely different historical period. Another one you can kind of think of is in Revelation, where it talks about the different eras of the house of Yahweh, how it starts, how it follows through from the time period of the apostles all the way through the death of the house of Yahweh, and then the reestablishment of the house of Yahweh in the last days. So that's about the best way that I can really kind of think about that. But eschatology, according to the dictionary, another thing that it means here. Let me see if I can kind of. It says a branch of theology concerned with the final events in the history of the world or of humankind. And it also mentions here under number 2 there, it says a belief concerning death, the end of the world, or the ultimate destiny of humankind, specifically any various, and it says Christian doctrines concerning the second coming, the resurrection of the dead, or the last judgment. So this is, going back, this is the promises, the promise to the prophets. And remember what the promise of the prophets is to see these things come to pass. Now, if I skip ahead here, skip ahead here, there's like from page 162 to page 176, it goes through some of the different promises that are made to the prophets. And on the back of on the page 176 here, I just want to read the back before we kind of go back into some of this other stuff here. But it says, all the prophets were made promises by Yahweh, and they were promised the land. They were promised the land of promise, and established everlasting kingdom, a holy city, a righteous priesthood, David as king of Israel, the king and Messiah as king of the world peace, resurrection of the dead, and life everlasting. So all of these promises were made by Yahweh, but Yahweh has not given these rewards yet. Remember, go back to what we looked at in Hebrews chapter 11. Okay, all of these, that they without us would not be made perfect. That all of these things are waiting for us to get our act together and take on the righteous character that Yahweh wants us to have, so that this kingdom can proceed, and so that we can be able to have the knowledge and have the wisdom and have the understanding that we need to go and stand in our place and to carry out the jobs that Yahweh wants us to do. But it shows here, it says, and then again, it talks about the end of days, and let me see where we want to go here. It says, let's see here. It says, from the time of Abraham on, those descendants of his of his who later called themselves Ben Yisrael, the Yisraelites, venerated, and I'll just read it how it says here, their one and only God as a living God, as one who took an active part in their history. And we know Yahweh is not a God, but Yahweh takes an active part in protecting and guiding his plan. Pastor has been bringing that out with the understanding he's given us about the Sea of Glass, and how all of this is, is playing out in front of Yahweh at this time. He shows it through when anybody tries to intervene with certain parts of the plan of Yahweh. If it doesn't fit, if these actions don't fit with what Yahweh has got planned, then Yahweh is going to step in and make sure that his plan doesn't get derailed. Yahweh's plan is not going to be derailed. But it shows here, it says that that Yahweh is a living Father and one who takes an active part in this, and he is not only the let me see here. It says they regarded him as a just Father who would reward or punish all men according to their morally good or evil lives. Okay, Yahweh sets before us. We have to remember, Yahweh sets before us, as Moshe showed us in Deuteronomy chapter 30. Yahweh sets before us life by righteousness and death and destruction. So he gives us the he lays out both paths for us, and then he tells us to choose life. You have to make your own choices. And this article continues to show, it says, because of his covenant with his chosen people, he proves himself to be faithful and loyal to his promises, and therefore in times of need he sends his people saviors. Now, did you notice what he said there? That in times of need, Yahweh sends his people saviors. Plural. Saviors. Such as Moses or Moshe, Yeshua ben Nun, various judges. He mentions King David. Of course, you mention, Yeshua Messiah. What about Yisrayl Hawkins? Yisrayl Hawkins fits this just as well as everybody else did. Everybody else that is mentioned here. Because it's, Moshe warned the people of what sin brings. The judges warned people of what sin brings and the consequences that come from that. Yisrayl Hawkins warns the people, is warning the world of what sin brings and the consequences of what sin brings. And more importantly, not only of what it brings, but also how to fix it. Points out what the problem is, but also provides a complete solution, a peaceful solution to all of the problems that exist in the world. And I can't believe this, I'm out of time already. I can't do that. Somebody else can, I can't. But anyway, we'll go ahead and we'll leave off here on page 163. We'll pick up here on 2 Samuel chapter 7. So with that, men, may Yahweh be with you and bless you.